Now, in this week's Battle of the Heroes and Villains, we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll that asked, what grade would you give the character Darth Maul? We'll then be giving him an overall score and seeing how he ranks against all the other characters we've done thus far, before then moving on to some of your comments about the character. And with that said, let's just get right to the results, where we'll see that 36% of voters gave him an A, 49% gave him a B, 11% thought he was a C-level character, which then left 2% to give him a D, and 1% that gave him an F. And when we do all the math here and consider A a score of 5 and F a score of 1, Darth Maul ends up with an average score of 4.17, and if you're curious or you happen to notice, since the results only added up to 99%, and that's thanks to the way the numbers get rounded off, I put an extra percentage point into the C ranking for calculating purposes, which is about the fairest way I can think to do it. And when we then go ahead and compare him to the other 3 characters we've done thus far, well, he ends up in last place currently, which isn't too surprising considering just who those 3 characters ahead of him are, and in my opinion, he does very much deserve to be in the mix with those other 3, and will, when we start covering more characters and the list gets longer, he'll end up more towards the top of the list, I'd wager. And speaking of characters we've yet to do, if you'd like, you can already head down to the comments and suggest which one we should do next. As usual, please respond to my pinned comment with one name or vote on a name already there. Whatever comment with a single character named in it will be the next one we do. In other words, I won't be adding votes from different comments together, even if it's the same character. I'll just be hunting down the single most upvoted comment. And as some of you have been pointing out to me, my comments haven't been pinned the last few weeks, which I think is thanks to the fact that I post and then pin the comment before releasing the video, and then they somehow get unpinned when I release it. So I will make sure this time that the comment is indeed pinned and easy to find. Oh, and one last thing to quickly note here. For whatever reason, YouTube changed these polls a bit, and they now allow anyone, not just the one who posts the poll, to respond to any and all of the comments left. Now, for one, I didn't read any of the responses people may have left on comments, and I only say that because I generally do read or try to read every single comment left on the polls. And so if you want to leave a comment that might make the video, you'll have to post your own comment, not to respond to someone else. And the main reason for that, for not reading the responses to other comments, is I generally like to respond to the poster directly, I guess you could say, or not be possibly influenced by what others are already saying to them. And to be honest, I don't like this change that YouTube has made, simply because I thought it was kind of nice that people could feel comfortable saying whatever they wanted, even if it wasn't a popular opinion, you could say, without having to worry about others bashing them for it. And so I hope this doesn't discourage people from leaving those unpopular opinions now. Either way, I guess it is what it is, and as far as I can tell, there's no way to turn off allowing people to respond to others. Not that I want to silence anybody or discourage conversations, but I just thought the old format worked really well for what I do here. Anyway, without further ado, let's get to your comments now, starting, as we always do, with the top-rated comment, which this week, fittingly enough, comes to us from Maul's arch-nemesis Obi-Wan Kenobi, who said, "I think he's half the character he used to be." And since I do appreciate a good pun, I'll say I actually think he's double the character he used to be, or that he was after The Phantom Menace. And to begin the discussion as to why that's the case, let's get to this comment from Ben Ryan, who said, "What a story Maul has. A failed apprentice to the Sith who wanted to overthrow the Republic. His anger and focus on Obi-Wan really is interesting to me. What we saw as a cool alien being sliced in half in Phantom Menace sparked an age-long vendetta against everyone's favorite Jedi. He even turned against the Sith. That's the best bit. He's a Darksider, yet not a Sith. You rarely see that anywhere in the canon, and it's a great piece of lore." And in an odd sort of way, I see Maul as almost the anti-Ahsoka. He starts out as a Sith who, I guess you could say, gets cut out of the picture, but when he comes back, he still tends to act like a Sith, even taking on an apprentice, but he very much claims not to be a Sith. And that's just like how Ahsoka still seems to be very much holding on to her Jedi ways, despite not wanting to be called a Jedi, though I think it would have and could still be, I suppose, interesting to see Luke track her down post-Return of the Jedi to help him out with the new academy, and he at some point ends up knighting her. And though I like her sort of defiance after the Council basically turned on her, I still think she deserves to become a full-fledged Jedi. Though I also feel like, as Ahsoka the White, she's become something more than all of that, more than just a Jedi. Either way, I'm talking about the wrong character, so let's back to Maul with this comment from Blake Davison, who said, "Few scenes in Star Wars give me genuine chills as the scene where Duel of the Fates begins, and when Maul looks up slowly with his hood on, those yellow eyes, man, what a character." Absolutely agreed. When those doors crack open and Duel of the Fates kicks in and Qui-Gon says, "We'll handle this," that's just one of the coolest moments in all of Star Wars. To this day, it also still gives me chills each and every time I see it. In fact, the whole fight or sequence with those three, Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon, is almost pure perfection. And I say almost because there is one thing I do take a bit of an issue with, and it's brought up by Gabriel Devon in his comment here. Only reason he isn't an A is because of how he died in Episode 1. He just stood there and let Obi-Wan kill him. Love him in Clone Wars though, absolutely great character. And I've always found it a little ironic that it's Obi-Wan who utters that classic line about the high ground in Revenge of the Sith, when he himself once won a fight when he very much didn't have the high ground. Anyway, the only excuse I can come up with for Maul just standing there and not killing him during the jump, like how Obi-Wan hacked apart Anakin when he tried to jump over him, is Maul knew Obi-Wan didn't have a lightsaber, and thus couldn't do anything to him, and maybe he figured he'd be able to play with his prey a bit more this way if Obi-Wan got out of the pit. In other words, Maul just kind of forgot about Qui-Gon's lightsaber. Okay, moving on now, we have this comment from Philip Sandgren, who said, "Even though his part in the story was short-lived, it carried meaning, importance, and functionality to the story. He is definitely an A to me, and a necessary character." And you know, even if we just look at The Phantom Menace and forget all about the Clone Wars, Rebels, and so on, Maul is a part of one of the biggest, most game-changing moments in the history of Star Wars, when you really think about it. And I do have a video about this in the works. I've been talking about it for a while now. Anyway, he's the one who kills Qui-Gon Jinn, who was going to train Anakin. Instead, again, because of Maul, Obi-Wan is left to train him, and, well, that doesn't exactly turn out for the best. Or does it? Because in the end, Anakin does destroy the Sith. He does bring balance to the Force. And I do think it's an oh-so-curious question, really. Was that the way it was all meant to go down? Or was Qui-Gon meant to actually be the one who trains Anakin? And how does that change history? But setting aside those questions for now, let's get to this comment from RoboTrick1, who said, "This is extremely tricky to answer, as some folks only know the movies, some know the movies plus Clone Wars, some have seen Clone Wars but not Rebels, plus there's, I assume, comics and books that I know nothing about." And first of all here, yes, there are plenty of comics and books that include Maul. Some are now legends, others are part of the new canon, and I'm assuming a lot of people haven't read them or don't even know they exist. And there were numerous comments this week from people who said they've only ever seen him in The Phantom Menace, so they gave him this grade, and it was usually a bit on the lower side. There were also those who said they've seen Clone Wars and not Rebels, and thus they gave him this grade, and generally those were higher marks. There were also those who knew his whole story, or have seen and read it all, and generally they gave him very high marks. And this kind of brings us to this comment from My Name, who said, "You really should separate the movies and the Clone Wars. In the Clone Wars, definitely an A. In the movies, he just looks cool, and that's the extent of his character." And yes, that might be the best or fairest way to do it, to separate the different incarnations of each character out and rate them independently. Yet at the same time, this is really meant to rate the overall character. And a lot of characters, of course, are explored in multiple sources, so to separate them out would also run the risk of this getting very confusing or hectic pretty quickly. Also, doing it this way kind of lets us get an average score from all corners of the fan base, or lets us see what the character's impact is on the total fan base, you could say, from those who just see the movies to those who keep up with absolutely everything. So unless someone has an amazing suggestion on how to do this better, I'll probably just stick with this current format. Okay, next up then we have this comment from Peter Teddy, who said, "Good, interesting character because of his mysterious nature, badly overused in the last few years." And there were quite a few people who said he'd been overused as of late, but I personally disagree, though I will say he is or was on the cusp of maybe being overused. I mean, despite some thinking his cameo in Solo was just blatant fan service, I think it was done to lay the foundation for Maul to appear in more anthology movies. I really think the plan was for some of the anthology films to be turned into a mini-series, I guess you could say. That next we'd get a Boba Fett movie, which would have Maul in it, then another solo movie where Maul would appear again. We'd be getting these loosely connected films where Maul was kind of the Thanos in the background, responsible for everything we were seeing, culminating in a movie where he'd need to be dealt with by someone, and it'd end with him on Malachor as we see in Rebels. And assuming I'm right and that was the plan, and if it had happened, at that point I think we could safely say he's being overused. Because the thing is, he does have a pretty complete story as is. Which brings us to this comment by Nicole Janice17, who said, "His death in Rebels was a great way to end his story. Good character in Menace, solid B, and great in Clone Wars Rebels, B+." And as said by a lot of people in the comments this week, his death scene in Rebels is one of the best moments in all of Star Wars. Not only is the fight itself brilliant, when you get over that momentary disappointment that it's so short, and we don't get Duel of the Fates Part 2 out of them, but the compassion Kenobi treats him with shows how he has become a true Jedi. And so it finishes the tragic story of Maul beautifully, while simultaneously setting up the final chapter of Kenobi's incredible story that we'll see, of course, in the original trilogy. There are simply not enough superlatives to say how great this moment is between two old enemies. Okay, and now let's get to a few more comments before wrapping this up, starting with this one from David Hills, who said, "I somewhat begrudgingly, because he shouldn't have survived being cut in two, give him an A. As for the movies go, there isn't much there, except as the antagonist of one of the best lightsaber duels ever. However, Clone Wars and Rebels take him to the next level. In Clone Wars, he clearly learned how to do more than swing his lightsaber. He sets up a criminal empire and installs a puppet regime on Mandalore. I'm sure Sidious took some pride in that, and took even more joy in taking it all away. Sidious even called him a rival. Coming from the dark side incarnate, that's a high compliment. In Rebels, he was no longer a Sith, and followed his own way, almost serving as a dark side version of Ahsoka, neither claiming their previous order, but following their path, but clearly their virtues a reflection of where they came from. His final moments are tragic, and I feel sorry for him every time. Maul is not my favorite prequel villain, but in Clone Wars and Rebels, he is always a pleasure to watch." Next up then, we have this comment from ET5920, who said, "The way Sam Witwer portrays Maul in the Clone Wars puts it at an A for me. Had we not had Maul appear in Clone Wars, he would probably be a C or D for me." Then we have this comment from John W. Kindig, who said, "Have you ever heard the tragedy of Darth Maul the Vengeful? I thought not. It's not a story Obi-Wan would tell you. One of the best duelists, one of the most tragic villains, as he never chose this life like Palpatine did, yet he knows no other way but hate and revenge. I do believe we still have yet to see the time Maul has come closest to success, as we may see the best Darth Maul has ever been in the last few episodes of Clone Wars Season 7. Deserves an A+ for Sam Witwer's Kenobi scream alone." Next then we have this comment from John Starrow, who said, "Phantom Menace Maul, F. He was just a visual meant to sell toys. Clone Wars Maul, B+. Clone Wars managed to save a lot of characters from the prequels, and that includes Maul." Next up then we have this comment from Stickmonster24, which oddly enough is the last comment posted at the time of me reading them all at least, and makes one of the few cases really against Maul, and probably the best I came across. It's a bit on the long side, so I'll only read the opening paragraph, but by all means, do pause and read the whole thing if you'd like. Anyway, he said, "I rated Darth Maul an F, a bit controversial, but please hear me out. I believe Darth Maul is a perfect example of when story writing is thrown out the window after a character has gained significant or sufficient traction with the fandom. The story writers react to the fandom by further regurgitating increasingly more powerful and ridiculous iterations of the original character's concept. This is done in the hope of further pleasing the fans' original response." Okay, again, feel free to pause and read the rest, but for now, let's move on to the final comment, which comes to us from Kiadi Mundi, who said, "Before the Clone Wars, D. After the Clone Wars and Rebels, A. B seems to be fair to me, even though he is definitely in my top 10 Star Wars characters." And I think it just summed up why the majority of voters, 49% in fact, gave him a B. Maybe he wasn't the best used character in The Phantom Menace, but his story in Rebels and Clone Wars is fantastic. And even though a lot of people would only rate him a B, I think, oddly enough, a lot of those same people would likely consider him a top 10-ish character in all of Star Wars. And like I said at the start, when this list starts to fill out a little bit, I fully expect him to stay near the upper half of it. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of Maul, or what I or anyone else had to say about him here in this video, or feel free to suggest what character we should do next. Either way, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.